This is going to be a video about creating value on facial features. For the practice features, I used ebony pencil, colored pencil, pastel, and oil pastel. Part of the reason I used ebony and colored pencil is that images in sketchbooks are smaller and therefore harder to do. Generally speaking, it will be faster to use chalk pastel or oil pastel for the larger drawing, and is normally what I expect students to use in order to complete the larger drawing on time. I would highly recommend experimenting with different art media in these sample features so that you learn the limitations of each. The first thing you should do is trace or draw each facial feature, the shapes, both the front and side view. Tracing is faster and can be accomplished quickly by scribbling on the back of the printed examples and using a pen or pencil to transfer them into your sketchbook. You should either find images of each facial feature from each view on the internet, or you can use a mirror to draw your own facial features as you look at yourself. Using a mirror can be more difficult for some people. I started drawing the mouths, but you can start with any feature you like. In this first drawing, I used ebony pencil, so I will talk about ebony for this example. The key is to remember that the higher parts of each facial feature will be lighter and the deeper or lower parts of those features will be darker. This is true no matter what the skin color is of the person you are drawing. The light source will also affect the values you need to use as you draw an impression of each feature. Once I had the outlines of the mouth drawn, I scribbled some ebony in the upper corner of my sketchbook so I could use a tissue and take some of the value to create a middle tone in the teeth. Once that value was applied, I used a pencil eraser to reobtain the highlights on the teeth. I then went back with a sharp number 2 pencil to not only create values in the gums, but I also created a dark line between each tooth and attempted some value on each tooth. I would suggest putting some value in the face around each practice feature so you realize you will also have to do this in the larger drawing you will be creating. As I did this in the first drawing, I used a tissue and my finger to smudge the ebony pencil around the mouth to show the lower parts of the face. These techniques will also help obtain smoother values with ebony and can sometimes be used with other art media. I also used an eraser to remove ebony pencil where the value became too dark. Sometimes I used the pencil eraser and other times I used the kneaded eraser. Before using the kneaded eraser, I pulled it apart several times so the eraser became very pliable. When using the kneaded eraser, I would press it onto the paper or rub it in a circular motion to remove the value where I thought the value became too dark. Eventually, I used the blending stump to get the value in very small areas of the mouth. I often moved back and forth between all these techniques as I create drawings. While it looks like I'm moving randomly around the drawings, I'm actually trying to keep the drawing unified. Therefore, I never work on one area of the drawing for very long before moving to another area so the mark making is unified. The other reason I move around the other parts of the mouth while drawing is that I noticed other areas that needed value as I continued to look at the image I was using as a reference. After about 15 minutes of drawing, I had developed enough value with both the number 2 pencil and ebony pencil to develop enough variance in the value to imitate both the high and low areas of the mouth. To create the side of the mouth drawing, I decided to use a variety of brown, peach, and pink colored pencils to obtain similar values to those of the person I was looking at for a reference. I started with a medium brown in a circular motion where I noticed medium or darker values in the reference image. The darker areas should be where the form of the face is lower, such as the part between the lips, the corners of the lips, and the insides of the nostrils. The reason I blend in a circular motion when creating value for portraits is that the human face is an organic object that is somewhat spherical in nature. Blending in a circular motion helps give the illusion of smooth value transitions when the drawing is complete. Once the medium brown was applied, I then used the peach in the medium to light areas to transition from the darker brown. This helped show where the form of the face and features were higher. I added pink and Tuscan red to the drawing because every human face has a little pink or rose color in their skin as well, even without makeup. This is because of the blood under our skin. Knowing that Tuscan Red is one of the darkest colored pencils, I used that color in the nostrils and the part between the lips. Once I felt there was enough value in the face, I used a combination of indigo blue and Tuscan Red in the background behind the face, so the lighter parts of the facial features showed up on the page. I also used the indigo blue in the lowest parts of the mouth and nose so the entire drawing was more unified, even though this was just practice. For the image of the front of the nose, I used chalk pastel. I again started with a medium tone. Since I had white, peach, pink, and violet, I started with the peach to give an overall value on the page. I'm glad I did this to show you can use any color scheme to create a portrait. As I smudged the chalk pastel, the peach became lighter. I then scumbled more peach over the areas that were a little darker, and I used the white to show the highest part of the nose. As I scumbled the pastels on the page, I would also occasionally blow the dust away from where I was working so I could see what I was doing. I then used the pink to start adding value in the darker areas of my nose drawing that were similar to the photo I was using as a reference. For a while, I continually used the peach and the pink to develop transitional areas, those between the high and low areas of the nose, to imitate the value shifts I noticed in my reference photo. I also used pink to create a darker area for the philtrum, or space immediately beneath the nose. Once I thought I had enough medium values, I used the white pastel to accentuate the sides of the nostrils and the bottom of the nose, as they are higher than the cheeks and the nostrils. I used the violet to show the low areas. This included the inside of the nostrils and the area to the right and left of the nostrils. I also used the blending stump to blend the violet into the pink and peach that was already on the nose and cheeks. Notice that most of the nose is just subtle value shifts. There are really only lines or edges under the nostrils and to the right and left of the nostrils. The other view of the nose was a 3/4 view from below. I used blue oil pastels for this drawing, again starting with the medium blue. When I had the medium blue in the areas I noticed in my reference photo, I then used a darker blue to show the lower areas of the nostrils and surrounding areas, like a darker value in the philtrum, a darker blue for the nasolabial fold. Occasionally I would have to scrape off the piling of the oil pastel with my finger onto a piece of paper towel or twist the oil pastel on the paper towel to remove the piling from the tip of the oil pastel. I also used a blue-violet to show the inside of the nostrils, the inside of the mouth, and to show the deep area behind the nose. After the darkest areas were applied, I used the white to highlight the most raised areas of the bridge of the nose, edges of the nostrils, and highest part of the lips, also known as the Cupid's bow. While I did sometimes use my fingers to smudge the oil pastel, I find that it makes the pastel rub right off the paper. So I normally blend oil pastels into each other as I create drawings. When I created the side view of the eye, I switched back to ebony pencil. After I blocked in the initial shape outlines, I used the ebony pencil to apply a really dark area just behind the bridge of the nose. This dark value was then used to create medium values on the side of the nose and eyelids. Ebony pencil was then used to create the pupil. I used the blending stump to create the value of the iris, the colored part of the eye. I then took a tissue to create the beginning of value on the eyeball and used an eraser to create a white area just beyond the iris to show the space between the iris and the outside of the eyeball, or the cornea. Then I started adding more dark values in the eyelids as well as between the eye and root of the nose. I also added dark value behind the lower eyelid and behind the cornea, the clear covering of the eye. I used a sharp number 2 pencil to create additional value in the cornea since this angle would provide a view through the cornea. I continued to develop values around the eye and finally started creating the eyelashes. Notice that the eyelashes are thicker where they connect to the eyelid. I often make a few lashes together to form a shape rather than think of each individual lash as a line. Unfortunately, I turned the sketchbook and didn't notice I was off camera, so you only see part of this process. Notice that I also showed the curve of the eye by changing the direction of the lashes behind the cornea. I also created lashes on the bottom in the same manner, changing direction as they went around the eye. I used the reference photo to simulate the angles of the lashes as best I could. For the front view of the eye, I used white, peach, green, and brown oil pastels. I normally start drawing eyes with the iris or the colored part of the eye, which I did here as well. I used the lightest green as my reference photo was an image of a woman with hazel eyes. After the green was added, I then added brown to the iris as well so that the striations of the muscle would show. I then added blue-violet to the pupil and to the area around the eye. I used peach to represent the higher areas of the eyelids, brow area, and bridge of the nose. I then used brown to represent the lower areas around the eyelids and for the deep area to the right of the eye. I continued to develop those areas using a combination of peach, medium brown, and a rusty brown similar to the coloration of the person in my reference photo. I then added another layer of brown and green to the iris and added peach and the rust color to the eye to imitate how the eyeball recedes at the edges. I then gave the eye an extreme highlight to represent the moisture and reflection of light in the eye. After this, I put more value around the eye with brown as well as blue-violet, which helped develop the form of the eye even more. I then used the blue-violet to represent the eyelashes, both on the top and bottom eyelids. Remember, the eyelashes should be thicker where they connect to the eye. One eyelash was scraped thinner by my fingernail because it was too thick at the end. I also scraped off the eyebrow in order to redevelop the value so the brown looked better. You can always scrape oil pastel off a drawing, but you then have to work with whatever color is left underneath. I again attempted chalk pastels for the side view of the ear. I applied a lighter violet to the majority of the ear and used the darker violet to represent lower shadowed areas. While chalk pastels blend easily, it's hard to get crisp edges with this medium. I tried to use the side of my finger and a blending stump to keep the folds of the ear separate. Once I blended those values, I used a pencil eraser to highlight the areas I could see of each form of the ear in my reference photo. I also used black in this drawing to illustrate the deepest areas of the ear as well as to show the depth of the head compared to the height of the ear on top of it. Lastly, I used the blending stump to make those values as crisp as I could make them to separate each form of the ear. In the final drawing of the front of the ear, I again chose to use colored pencils, this time using a variety of greens. I again started with the medium green in most of the ear, leaving a few places white where I observed highlights in my reference image. I then used a darker green to emphasize the lower parts of the ear as well as the parts of the skull underneath to make the ear pop forward. I then used the darkest green first on the skull behind the top of the ear. Then I used that same dark green in the deepest folds of the ear and finally behind the skull and the ear so both objects would look more three-dimensional. I then added another layer of each of the colors to make the forms more dense and rich looking, as well as make final revisions of the form of the ear. By the time you have created each feature, you should understand what is necessary to create the differences in value necessary to represent each facial feature in your larger portrait drawing. The values in your practice features may not be as well developed as the final image you create. Your next challenge is to select a color scheme that will help communicate the mood or message of your portrait.